Thomas Henley wiped the sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on the swing set. It was barely 7 in the morning, but he'd been at the Riverside Community Center for over an hour already. He liked coming in early before the crowds arrived, before the stares and whispers began. At 42 years old, Thomas had grown used to being invisible, or worse, visible in all the wrong ways. The maintenance worker who didn't quite fit in. The man who spoke too softly or not at all. The one people crossed the street to avoid, not because he was dangerous, but because he made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't explain. He tested the swing one more time, pushing it gently to make sure it moved smoothly. Perfect. Everything Thomas did was done with care, with precision. It was the one thing he could control in a world that often felt too loud, too fast, too confusing. "Morning, Tommy," called out Derek, the community center's director, as he pulled into the parking lot. Thomas flinched slightly at the nickname. His name was Thomas, but he'd stopped correcting people years ago. "Got that swing fixed already?" "Good man," Thomas nodded, gathering his tools. Derek was already walking away, phone pressed to his ear. It was always like this. People acknowledged him just enough to be polite, then moved on quickly. He was useful for fixing things, for keeping the building running. But that was where his value ended in their eyes. Inside the building, Thomas made his way to the storage room he'd converted into a small workshop. It wasn't much, just a corner with a workbench and his tools, but it was his. This was where he spent his lunch breaks, his evenings after everyone else had gone home. This was where he was working on something that mattered. But he wasn't alone this morning. A woman stood in the hallway, struggling with 3 large boxes stacked in her arms. Papers were sliding out of the top box, and she was trying to catch them with her chin while simultaneously attempting to push open the office door with her hip. Thomas moved without thinking. He reached out and caught the papers just as they were about to fall, then carefully took the top 2 boxes from her arms. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled. A real smile, not the tight, uncomfortable ones he usually received. "Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I'm Rachel. Rachel Morrison. I'm the new social worker here." "Thomas," he managed, his voice quiet. "I can carry these to your office. That would be amazing. I thought I could manage all 3 trips in one go, but clearly my ambition exceeded my arm strength." She laughed, and it was a warm sound that made something in Thomas's chest feel a little less tight. He followed her down the hall to one of the smaller offices. She'd only been here a week, but the space already felt different from the sterile offices of other staff members. There were plants on the windowsill, colorful drawings that looked like they'd been made by kids, and a photo of a golden retriever wearing a birthday hat. "Just set them anywhere," Rachel said. "I'm still trying to figure out how to organize this place. I moved here from Portland last month and everything's still a bit chaotic." Thomas placed the boxes carefully on her desk. He noticed the way she arranged things, the thought she put into making the space welcoming. Most people didn't think about things like that. "The swing set," he said suddenly. "Outside. It's fixed now. Safe for the kids." Rachel's face brightened. "You fixed that?" "I saw it was broken yesterday and was worried about it." "Thank you, Thomas. That's really kind of you." "Kind." The word hung in the air between them. Thomas couldn't remember the last time someone had called him kind. Weird, odd, strange, off. Those were the words people used. But never kind. He nodded once and left before his face could betray how much that simple word had affected him. At lunch, Thomas sat alone at his usual spot behind the building, eating the sandwich he'd packed that morning. He could hear voices from the staff break room, the laughter and easy conversation that happened when he wasn't there. He'd tried joining them once years ago, but the way the chatter had died down, the awkward glances had told him everything he needed to know. "Did you meet the new guy in maintenance?" someone was saying. The voice drifted through the open window. Thomas recognized it as belonging to Patricia, one of the youth program coordinators. "You mean Thomas?" That was Kevin from accounting.
"He's been here for like 15 years, Pat. Not exactly new." I know.
But the new social worker, Rachel, she was asking about him. Just giving her the usual heads up, Thomas's jaw tightened. Here it came. The warnings. The explanations about how he was harmless but weird. "He's fine," Kevin said. "Just keeps to himself. Doesn't really do the whole social thing, you know? Some people are just like that. I'm just saying she should know. He's a bit odd. Not in a bad way, just different. Probably better if she doesn't spend too much time trying to chat him up." I don't think the man's capable of normal conversation. Thomas carefully wrapped up the rest of his sandwich, his appetite gone. He'd heard variations of this conversation countless times. It shouldn't hurt anymore, but somehow it still did. That evening, Thomas stayed late as usual. The building was quiet, just the hum of the old heating system and the sound of his sandpaper against wood. He was working on his project, the one he'd been devoted to for 10 years now. The Cradle was nearly finished. Just a few more weeks of work, maybe a month, and it would be done. His hands moved over the smooth wood, checking every joint, every curve. This had to be perfect. It was a promise, the last promise he'd ever made to his little sister, Emily. She'd been so excited about the baby, about becoming a mother. And he'd promised her something beautiful to welcome the child into the world. The accident had happened before he could finish, before he could give her the gift, before he could tell her how proud he was of her. So he kept working, year after year, getting every detail right. Because this was all he had left of her, of that promise, of that love. A sound made him look up. Through the workshop's small window, he saw someone walking past. Rachel. She glanced toward the window, and for a moment their eyes met. Thomas quickly turned away, covering his work with a cloth. When he looked back, she was gone. He packed up his tools slowly, carefully. Tomorrow would be another day of being invisible, of being the odd one people warned each other about. But here in this workshop with this unfinished promise, he felt like himself. He felt like the brother Emily had always believed he could be. Thomas locked up the workshop and headed home to his quiet house. The house his mother had left him when she passed. The house that had been filled with her voice telling him he was special. He was loved. He was enough just as he was. He missed that voice more than anything. As he drove through town, he passed the diner where the regulars gathered. Through the window he could see the familiar faces laughing and talking. He'd never been part of that world, never quite understood the unspoken rules that made it work. His mother used to tell him that someday someone would see him the way she did, really see him. Not the awkward exterior, not the difference, but the person underneath who loved deeply and tried hard and cared about doing things right. Thomas had stopped believing that years ago. But tonight, driving home under the stars, he thought about Rachel's smile. About how she'd said thank you like she meant it. About how she'd called him kind. Maybe his mother had been right about some things after all. He pulled into his driveway, grabbed his lunchbox from the passenger seat, and headed inside. Tomorrow he'd go back to being invisible. But tonight, just for tonight, he let himself remember what it felt like to be seen as something other than strange. And in his workshop, beneath that protective cloth, a cradle waited. A promise 10 years in the making, carved from wood and love and the kind of devotion that doesn't make sense to most people. But it made sense to Thomas. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Rachel Morrison had learned a lot about small towns in the 3 weeks since she'd moved to Riverside. She'd learned that everyone knew everyone else's business. That the coffee at Miller's Diner was terrible, but nobody would ever say so. And that people here had very strong opinions about Thomas Henley. Just don't waste your time trying to be his friend, Patricia had told her during their lunch break. He doesn't really do friendship. Trust me, people have tried. But Rachel couldn't shake the memory of how carefully Thomas had carried her boxes, how gentle his voice had been, how his whole face had changed when she'd thanked him. That wasn't someone who couldn't do friendship. That was someone who hadn't been given much reason to try. She started small. When she saw Thomas fixing the water fountain near her office, she brought him a cup of coffee, black with 1 sugar, because she'd noticed that's how he took it in the break room on the rare occasions he came in. For you, she said simply, setting it down on his toolbox. Figured you could use it. Thomas looked at the cup like she'd handed him something precious. Thank you, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, how did you know? I pay attention, Rachel said with a smile. That's kind of my job. Over the next few weeks, Rachel found reasons to cross paths with Thomas. She'd ask him about the old radiator in her office that clanked at odd hours. He'd explain the building's ancient heating system in careful detail, his hands moving as he talked, his face more animated than she'd seen before. She learned he knew everything about the building's history, about how it had been built in 1952, about the original architect's vision for community spaces. When he talked about these things, his voice lost its uncertain edge. He was confident, knowledgeable, alive. "You really love this place," Rachel observed one afternoon as Thomas showed her the original blueprints he'd found in the basement. "It's structured," Thomas said, searching for the word. "Buildings make sense. If something's broken, there's usually a logical reason why, and there's always a way to fix it." Rachel heard what he didn't say, that people weren't like that. That people were complicated and unpredictable and often cruel for no reason at all. But the town wasn't making things easy. At Miller's Diner one Saturday morning, Rachel overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. "I saw the new social worker talking to Tommy Henley again," Mrs. Ferguson was saying to her friend. "Poor thing probably doesn't know any better yet." "Someone should warn her," the friend replied. "That man's not right. Never has been." "My grandson says he's creepy," Mrs. Ferguson continued. "Just stands there staring sometimes, doesn't say anything." Rachel set down her coffee cup harder than she intended. Both women looked over, but she was already heading to the counter to pay. She didn't trust herself to speak without saying something she'd regret. The worst part was what happened the following Tuesday. Rachel's ex-husband's sister, Diane, had somehow ended up living in Riverside too. It was part of why Rachel had hesitated about taking this job, but she'd needed the fresh start too badly to let it stop her. Diane cornered her outside the grocery store. "I heard you've been spending time with the maintenance guy at the community center," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Rachel, honey, I know the divorce was hard, but you don't need to settle. That man, he's not even capable of a normal relationship." "His name is Thomas," Rachel said coldly. "And I'm not settling. I'm making a friend." "A friend?" Diane laughed. "Sweetie, people like him don't have friends. There's a reason for that. You're just going to end up disappointed when you realize he can't give you what normal people can." Rachel walked away before she said something that would cause family drama for years to come. But Diane's words stuck with her, not because she believed them, but because they revealed what everyone seemed to think. That Thomas was somehow less than. That he wasn't worthy of connection or friendship or love. It made her think about her ex-husband, Nathan. Everyone had thought he was perfect. Successful lawyer, charming, knew exactly what to say at parties. But behind closed doors, he'd been emotionally absent. He'd never really seen her. Never really listened. He'd been too busy being the person everyone expected him to be. Thomas saw her. When she talked about her work with at-risk youth, he listened with complete focus. When she mentioned her dog who'd passed away last year, his eyes had filled with genuine sadness. "Dogs are honest," he'd said. "They love you exactly as you are." She suspected Thomas understood that feeling better than most. One evening, Rachel stayed late finishing paperwork. The building was quiet, most of the staff long gone. She heard a sound coming from the direction of the storage area where Thomas kept his tools. Curious, she followed it. Light spilled from under a door she'd never seen open before. Through the small window, she could see Thomas bent over something, his hands moving with incredible precision. She couldn't see what he was working on, but she could see his face. The concentration, the care, and something else. Sadness. Deep, old sadness that seemed to pour out of him into whatever he was creating. Rachel stepped back quietly. This was private, whatever it was. Sacred even. She headed back to her office, but the image of Thomas's face stayed with her. The next day, she tried to act normal, but Thomas seemed to sense something had shifted. He was more cautious around her, his answers shorter. It broke her heart a little. "Thomas," she said during their afternoon coffee break, which had become something of a routine, "can I ask you something?" He nodded, looking nervous. "Do you have any siblings?" His whole body went still. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "I had a sister, Emily. She died 10 years ago." "I'm so sorry," Rachel said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "She was the only one who never made me feel like I was wrong," Thomas said, staring at his coffee cup. "The only one who said I was perfect exactly as I was." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person." "She was going to be a mother," Thomas continued, the words coming faster now like a dam breaking. "She was so excited. She'd call me every day with updates about nursery colors and baby names and all these plans she had." He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much. "She would be proud of you," Rachel said softly. "I can tell." Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw such raw vulnerability in his eyes that it took her breath away. "How can you tell?" "Because you're someone worth being proud of," Rachel said simply. And I think the people who really knew you understood that. Something changed between them in that moment. A wall coming down, a bridge being built. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened. Thomas helped Rachel plant a garden outside her office window. She taught him about the new youth programs she was developing. He told her about the birds that nested in the building's eaves every spring. She shared stories about her childhood, about always feeling like she was playing a part everyone expected. "I understand that," Thomas said, "feeling like you're not quite right for the role you're supposed to play. But what if the role is wrong?" Rachel asked. "What if we're perfectly right, and it's everyone else's expectations that are the problem?" Thomas considered this, his hands still carefully patting soil around a seedling. "I never thought about it that way." At the community center's monthly board meeting, budget cuts were announced. Programs would need to be eliminated. Rachel watched Thomas's face go pale when they mentioned closing the workshop spaces to save on utility costs. "No," she said, surprising herself by standing up. "Those workshop spaces are important. They're being used." The board chairman looked skeptical.
For what exactly?
"For creation, for craft, for giving people a space to work with their hands and make something meaningful." She looked directly at Thomas, who was staring at her in shock. "We can't put a price tag on that kind of value." There was murmuring around the room. Patricia rolled her eyes. Kevin looked uncomfortable. But Mrs. Chen, the elderly board member who rarely spoke, cleared her throat. "I agree with Rachel," she said firmly. "My late husband knew Thomas's mother. She always said her son had the hands of an artist and the heart of a poet. Maybe it's time we started seeing what she saw." The motion to close the workshops was tabled for further discussion. It wasn't a victory, but it was a chance. After the meeting, Thomas found Rachel in the hallway. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was the right thing to do," she said. "And because whatever you're working on in there matters." "I can tell." He swallowed hard.
"I don't understand why you're being so kind to me." "Because you deserve kindness, Thomas."
"Every person does. But especially people like you, who give so much of themselves and ask for so little in return." For the first time since she'd known him, Thomas smiled. Really smiled. And Rachel realized with startling clarity that she didn't just like Thomas as a friend. She admired him. She respected him. And yes, she was beginning to care about him in ways that went deeper than friendship. That night, as Rachel drove home, she thought about everything people had said about Thomas, about how he wasn't worth the effort, wasn't capable of connection, wasn't someone to waste time on. They were wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. And she was going to make sure they knew it. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen through that workshop window. The care in Thomas's hands, the grief on his face, the dedication to something he kept hidden from everyone. It felt wrong to have witnessed that private moment, but it had also changed something fundamental in how she understood him. She knew she shouldn't pry. Thomas would share what he wanted to share when he was ready. But curiosity mixed with genuine concern kept nagging at her. What was he building? And why did it make him cry? On Saturday morning, her day off, Rachel found herself at the town library. She told herself she was just doing research, being thorough, but the truth was more complicated than that. Looking for something specific? Asked the librarian, an older woman named Helen who'd been helping Rachel get her library card the week before. Actually, yes.
Do you have old newspapers on file?
From about 10 years ago. Helen's face softened with understanding. You're asking about the accident, aren't you? Emily Henley. Rachel's heart skipped. So her instinct had been right. I didn't know Emily well, Helen continued, pulling out a box of archived newspapers. But everyone in town knew her. She had this light about her, you know. Always smiling, always kind to everyone. The complete opposite of how people treat her brother. What happened? Rachel asked gently. Helen sighed, opening the box. Car accident on Route 47. Drunk driver crossed the center line. Emily was 19, 6 months pregnant. She didn't make it. Neither did the baby. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She found the newspaper from March 2015 and read the article. There was a photo of Emily, and she could see the family resemblance. The same gentle eyes as Thomas, the same quiet smile, but it was the quote at the end that broke Rachel's heart. Thomas had said, My sister was going to be the best mother in the world. I'd promised to build something special for the baby. I just wanted her to know how loved they both were. Now Rachel understood. The workshop, the late nights, the tears. Thomas had been keeping that promise for 10 years. She carefully returned the newspaper, thanked Helen, and sat in her car for a long time, processing everything. This wasn't just about building furniture. This was about love that didn't end with death. About a promise that mattered so much that someone would spend a decade making sure it was kept. On Monday, Rachel saw Thomas differently. Not with pity, but with a kind of awe. He was fixing a broken door hinge, something so mundane, but she knew now that those same hands were creating something extraordinary in his workshop. Coffee, she offered. The same as always. Thank you, he said. The same as always. But there was a new depth to her understanding of those simple words. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not running away like everyone else. They fell into their routine. Morning coffee, brief conversations about the building or the weather or the programs Rachel was developing. But beneath it all, Rachel felt the weight of what she knew, the secret she carried about the cradle. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Thomas was helping her move some heavy boxes of supplies for a youth art program. As they worked, she asked about his favorite wood to work with. His eyes lit up. Cherry, he said without hesitation. It's strong but gentle. Ages beautifully. Gets richer over time instead of wearing out. That's poetic, Rachel said with a smile. Emily used to say I thought about wood the way other people thought about people, Thomas said, then looked surprised that he'd mentioned his sister. Rachel took a chance. You must miss her a lot. Thomas set down the box carefully. For a moment she thought he might shut down, but instead he said, every day. She understood me in a way no one else ever has. What was she like? And then, as if a door had been unlocked, Thomas began to talk. About how Emily would defend him on the playground when kids made fun of him. About how she'd sit with him for hours while he explained his special interests, never once looking bored. About how she'd been the first person he told when he'd figured out that his brain just worked differently than most people's. She said different wasn't wrong, Thomas said quietly. She said the world needed people who saw things from angles everyone else missed. She was right, Rachel said firmly. Thomas looked at her with those gentle eyes. You remind me of her sometimes. The way you listen. The way you don't make me feel like I need to be someone else. Rachel felt tears threaten. You never need to be anyone else, Thomas. Not with me. He nodded, and she could see him struggling with something. Finally, he said, she was pregnant when she died. She was so happy about the baby. I'd promised to build her a cradle. Something beautiful and safe and perfect. I wanted to give it to her before the baby came. Oh, Thomas, Rachel breathed. I never got to finish it in time, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. The accident happened and I'd only done the basic structure. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't break the promise even though she was gone. So I've been working on it all this time, making it perfect, the way it should have been. Rachel understood now why the board's decision to possibly close the workshop had devastated him so much. It wasn't just a space. It was where he went to keep his sister's memory alive, to honor a promise that meant everything. Can I see it? She asked softly. Only if you want to show me. Thomas hesitated for so long she thought he'd say no, but then he nodded. I think Emily would have wanted you to see it. They walked to the workshop after everyone else had left for the day. Thomas unlocked the door with shaking hands. The space was neat and organized, tools in their proper places, sawdust swept clean. And in the center, covered with a soft cloth, was the cradle. Thomas carefully removed the cloth and Rachel gasped. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The wood glowed with a deep, rich warmth. Hand-carved animals danced along the sides. Deer and rabbits and birds all rendered with such detail and love that they seemed ready to leap into life. The rockers were smooth and perfectly balanced. A small music box was built into the side. It plays Brahms' Lullaby, Thomas said quietly. He wound the key and gentle notes filled the workshop. Emily's favorite. Rachel couldn't speak. She walked around the cradle slowly, seeing the years of work, the thousands of hours of dedication, the love carved into every inch. This wasn't just furniture. This was devotion made visible. Thomas, this is extraordinary, she finally managed. It's a masterpiece. I wanted it to be perfect, he said. She deserved perfect. What will you do with it now? Rachel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I want to give it to someone who needs it. Someone Emily would have wanted to help. There's a women's shelter 1 county over, Hope House. They help mothers who have nowhere else to go. I thought maybe someone there could use it. Someone who needs to know they're not alone. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Of course, that's what he would do. Take this precious thing, this labor of love, and give it away to someone who needed it more. That's beautiful, she whispered. Emily would be so proud of you. Thomas's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you really think so? I know so. Thomas, what you've done here, what you've created, it's about so much more than wood and craftsmanship. It's about love that doesn't end, about keeping promises even when it's hard, about seeing the worth in people everyone else overlooks. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Rachel saw the moment he truly understood that she got it, that she saw him not as the town's odd maintenance man but as a person of extraordinary depth and devotion. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion, for seeing this. For seeing me. Always, Rachel promised, and she meant it with everything she had. That night, Rachel lay in bed thinking about Thomas and Emily, about promises and love, and the way people could be so blind to the extraordinary in their midst. The town saw Thomas as someone not worth knowing, not capable of deep connection, but they were wrong. So completely wrong. Thomas Henley had more capacity for love and devotion than most people would ever understand. He'd spent 10 years keeping a promise to someone who'd died, not because he had to, but because his love was bigger than death. And somewhere along the way, Rachel realized she'd fallen in love with him. Not the pity kind of love or the charity kind, but the real kind, the kind that sees a person fully, sees all their quirks and differences and gentle beauty and says yes, yes to all of it. She wasn't sure when it had happened. Maybe during one of their morning coffee conversations. Maybe when she'd watched him carefully plant seedlings in her garden. Maybe when he'd talked about his sister with such tenderness. Or maybe it had been there from the beginning. From the moment he'd caught her falling papers and carried her boxes with such gentle care. Rachel fell asleep with a smile on her face, knowing that tomorrow she'd see Thomas again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Some people weren't worth loving, the town had said. They'd never been more wrong about anything in their lives. The weeks following Rachel's visit to the workshop felt different. Thomas felt different. For the first time in 10 years, the weight he'd been carrying felt just a little bit lighter because someone else understood. Someone else saw what the cradle meant. Rachel didn't treat him any differently after seeing his work, which somehow made it even more meaningful. They still had their morning coffee. They still talked about small things and big things. But there was a new comfort between them, a shared understanding that went beyond words. Thomas found himself thinking about Rachel at odd moments. When he heard a joke on the radio that he knew would make her laugh. When he saw a bird building a nest and remembered how she'd gotten excited about the same thing. When he lay in bed at night and replayed their conversations, amazed that someone wanted to hear what he had to say. It scared him a little, this growing feeling. He'd spent so long being alone, being the one people warned each other about. What if he was misreading things? What if Rachel's kindness was just that? Kindness, and he was foolish enough to mistake it for something more. But then she'd smile at him in that particular way, or touch his arm briefly when she laughed at something he'd said, and hope would flicker in his chest like a candle flame. The cradle was nearly finished. Just the final coat of polish, the last adjustments to the music box mechanism. Thomas worked on it with mixed feelings. He'd been working on this for so long that part of him didn't know who he'd be without it. But another part, the part that listened to Emily's voice in his memories, knew it was time to let it go to someone who needed it, time to keep his promise in the fullest way possible. I think I'm ready, he told Rachel one morning over coffee, to donate the cradle. I called Hope House yesterday. They said they have a young mother there right now, Anna. She's due in 3 weeks and has nothing for the baby. Rachel's eyes shone with emotion. Thomas, that's wonderful. When are you planning to take it? This Saturday, he said, then hesitated. Would you come with me? I'm not very good at talking to new people, and I want to explain it right. About why I made it. About Emily. I'd be honored, Rachel said softly. Truly honored. That afternoon something happened that Thomas had never expected. A small group gathered outside the workshop. Mrs. Chen was there, along with Helen from the library, and a few other community members Thomas recognized but had never really spoken to. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Thomas, Helen told me about the cradle you've been building. For your sister's memory. I'd like to see it if you'd be willing to show us." Thomas looked at Rachel, panic in his eyes. She gave him an encouraging nod. With shaking hands, he unlocked the workshop and led them inside. He removed the cloth from the cradle, and the silence that followed was heavy with awe. "My God," Mrs. Chen whispered. "Thomas, this is museum quality. This is art." "I knew your mother was right about you," Helen said, tears in her eyes. "She always said you had a gift." One by one, they examined the cradle. The intricate carvings, the perfect joints, the way the wood seemed to glow with warmth. Thomas stood to the side, uncomfortable with the attention, but also feeling something strange and new. Pride, maybe, or validation. "The town needs to know about this," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Thomas, would you let me tell the newspaper about what you've done? About the promise you've kept?" Thomas's first instinct was to say no. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to be stared at even more than he already was. But Rachel caught his eye and mouthed, "It's up to you." "If it helps other people understand," he said quietly, "then yes, but only if we talk about Emily, about what a good person she was, about how she should be remembered." Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding. "Of course. This is her story as much as yours." After they left, Rachel stayed behind. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Strange," Thomas admitted. "Like the world shifted a little bit and I'm not sure where I'm standing anymore." "You're standing exactly where you've always been," Rachel said. "The world is just finally catching up to seeing you clearly." That evening, something prompted Thomas to do something he hadn't done in years. He went to the hardware store, bought supplies, and started a new project in his workshop. Something smaller, more personal. A wooden box with careful joinery and a smooth finish. It wasn't grand like the cradle, but it was made with just as much care. He worked late into the night, his hands sure and confident. When it was finished, he stood back and looked at it. Simple, elegant, useful. He hoped Rachel would like it. On Friday afternoon, Thomas found Rachel in her office. She was surrounded by paperwork, looking stressed about budget reports that were due. "I made you something," he said, more nervous than he'd been in years. Rachel looked up, surprised. Thomas held out the wooden box. She took it carefully, running her hands over the smooth surface. It was made from maple, light and strong, with a small brass clasp. When she opened it, she saw he'd lined the inside with soft felt. "Thomas, this is beautiful," she breathed. "You made this for me?" He nodded, his face flushing. "You're always losing your pens and your keys and those little sticky notes you use. I thought maybe this could help keep things organized. But also because I wanted to make you something, to say thank you. For everything." Rachel set the box down carefully and did something that shocked them both. She crossed the small office and hugged him. Thomas froze for a moment, his brain trying to process the sudden contact. But then slowly, carefully, he hugged her back. She smelled like the lavender soap from the bathroom and coffee, and something else that was just her. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could feel it. When she stepped back, there were tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me." "Really?" Thomas couldn't keep the surprise out of his voice. "Really. My ex-husband used to give me expensive jewelry for birthdays, but he never thought about what I actually needed or wanted. This," she held up the box. "This shows you were thinking about me, about my life, about what would make things easier for me. That means more than you know." Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been closed for so very long. "Rachel," he started, then stopped. The words were there, pressing against his ribs, but they felt too big, too dangerous to let out. "Yes?" she prompted gently. "Tomorrow, after we deliver the cradle. Would you want to get dinner? With me? Like a date, I mean. If that's something you'd want to do. But if not, that's okay too. I just thought maybe—" "Yes," Rachel interrupted, smiling so wide her whole face lit up. "Yes, Thomas. I would love to have dinner with you. I've been hoping you'd ask. You have?" The surprise in his voice made her laugh. "Of course I have. Thomas, you're kind and thoughtful and talented, and you listen when I talk like what I'm saying actually matters. Why wouldn't I want to spend more time with you? Because people don't usually want to spend time with me," Thomas thought. "Because I'm the odd one, the strange one, the one people cross the street to avoid." But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just smiled. A real genuine smile that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. Okay, he said. Tomorrow, dinner after the Cradle. That night, Thomas could barely sleep. His mind raced with possibilities and fears in equal measure. What if he said something wrong at dinner? What if he didn't understand some social cue and ruined everything? What if Rachel realized she'd made a mistake? But then he remembered her face when he'd given her the box. The genuine joy. The way she'd hugged him without hesitation. Rachel saw him. Really saw him. And somehow, impossibly, she'd chosen to stay. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Thomas carefully loaded the Cradle into his truck, securing it with blankets to protect it during the drive. Rachel met him at the community center wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes look like the sky. "Ready?" she asked. Thomas looked at the Cradle one last time. 10 years. 10 years of sanding and carving and adjusting and perfecting. 10 years of keeping a promise to someone he'd loved with his whole heart. "Yes," he said. "I'm ready." They drove to Hope House in comfortable silence, the Cradle secured in the truck bed behind them. Thomas's hands were tight on the steering wheel, but Rachel reached over and briefly touched his arm, a gesture of support that steadied him. This was the right thing to do. Emily would have wanted this. She'd always been the one who saw people others overlooked, who helped those who needed it most. Today, Thomas was going to honor her memory in the best way he knew how. By giving love away, by keeping his promise, by being the brother she'd always believed he could be. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't doing it alone. Rachel was with him. And maybe, just maybe, that changed everything. Hope House sat at the end of a quiet street, a converted Victorian home painted soft yellow with white trim. A sign out front read, "Safe Harbor for New Beginnings." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he parked the truck. "Take your time," Rachel said gently. "There's no rush." A woman in her 50s came out to greet them. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You must be Thomas and Rachel." "I'm Catherine, the director. We're so grateful you've come." Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice yet. Together, he and Rachel carefully lifted the Cradle from the truck bed. It caught the morning light, the wood gleaming like honey. Catherine's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my, I had no idea." "Thomas, this is extraordinary." Inside, the house smelled like fresh bread and coffee. Women of various ages moved through the common areas, some pregnant, some with babies in their arms. They all stopped when they saw the Cradle. "Anna's upstairs resting," Catherine said. "Let me get her. I know she'll want to meet you." Thomas set the Cradle down carefully in the living room. A small group had gathered, staring at the intricate carvings, the perfect craftsmanship. He felt exposed under their gazes, but Rachel stood close beside him, her presence anchoring him. Anna appeared at the top of the stairs. She was young, maybe 22, with dark circles under her eyes but a determined set to her jaw. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. "You made this?" she asked Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. "For me?" "For your baby," Thomas said quietly. "So they know they're loved. So they know they matter." Anna came down the stairs slowly, her eyes never leaving the Cradle. When she reached it, she ran her fingers over the carved animals, traced the smooth rockers, touched the music box key with something like reverence. "I don't understand," she said, tears beginning to fall. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Thomas swallowed hard. Rachel touched his back gently, encouraging him. "I had a sister," he began. "Her name was Emily. She was going to have a baby 10 years ago. She was so excited, so ready to be a mother. I promised her I'd build a Cradle for the baby. Something beautiful and safe and perfect." Anna looked up at him, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "She died before I could finish it," Thomas continued, his voice thick. "Car accident. She and the baby both. But I couldn't stop working on it. I'd made a promise, and even though she was gone, the promise still mattered. So I kept building. For 10 years, getting every detail right." "I'm so sorry," Anna whispered. "My sister would have wanted this to go to someone who needed it," Thomas said. "Someone who needed to know they weren't alone, that people cared, that their baby mattered." Anna broke down then, sobbing into her hands. Catherine moved to comfort her, but Anna waved her away. She looked up at Thomas with streaming eyes. "My family kicked me out when they found out I was pregnant," she said. "My boyfriend left. Everyone I knew said I was worthless, that I was making a mistake, that I'd ruin this baby's life. I've been here for 2 months and I have nothing. No crib, no clothes, nothing. And I keep thinking maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not good enough to be someone's mother. Thomas understood that feeling. The weight of other people's judgments. The way their words could become the voice in your own head telling you that you weren't enough. You're here, he said firmly. You're fighting for your baby. You're doing the hard thing instead of the easy thing. That's what good mothers do. My sister used to tell me that different wasn't wrong, Thomas continued. That the world needed people who saw things from different angles. I think the world needs mothers who love their babies even when everything is hard. Especially then. Anna reached out and took Thomas's hand, squeezing it tight. Thank you, she said. Thank you for seeing me, for thinking I'm worth this. You are worth this, Rachel said, speaking for the first time. You and your baby both. You deserve beautiful things and people who believe in you. Catherine wound the music box and Brahms' lullaby filled the room. Several of the women wiped their eyes. Anna knelt beside the cradle, her hands on the smooth wood, and let herself cry. Thomas felt Rachel's hand slip into his. He held on tight. They stayed for an hour, meeting the other women, hearing their stories. Thomas was quiet, but he listened. Really listened. And when they finally left, several women hugged him, thanked him, told him he'd given them hope. In the truck driving back to Riverside, Thomas and Rachel sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Rachel said, "You changed that girl's life today. You know that, right?" "I kept a promise," Thomas said simply. "You did more than that. You showed her she was worthy of something beautiful. That someone cared enough to spend 10 years making sure she had what she needed." Thomas thought about that. About Anna's face when she'd seen the cradle. About how her whole posture had changed, straightened, when he'd told her she was doing the hard thing, the right thing. Emily would have liked her, he said softly. She would have wanted to help. "So you helped for her," Rachel said. "And for yourself. And for that baby who's going to rock in the most beautiful cradle ever made, surrounded by carved animals and love." Thomas felt something release in his chest. The promise was kept, fully, completely kept. Emily could rest. The baby would be cherished, and Thomas could finally let go of the weight he'd carried for 10 years. "Thank you for coming with me," he said to Rachel. "There's nowhere else I would have wanted to be," she replied. Dinner that night was at a small Italian restaurant in the next town over. Thomas had chosen it specifically because no one from Riverside would be there to stare or whisper. He wanted this evening to be just about them. Rachel told him about her childhood in Portland, about her dog Rusty, who'd been her best friend through high school, about her disastrous marriage to a man who looked perfect on paper, but couldn't see her as a real person. Thomas told her about his mother, who'd defended him fiercely even when she didn't fully understand him, about Emily's laugh that could light up a room, about discovering woodworking in shop class and finally finding something that made sense to his hands and his brain. "What do you want to do now?" Rachel asked over dessert. "Now that the cradle is finished?" Thomas had been thinking about that. "I want to make more things. Not cradles necessarily, but things that matter, things that help people." Mrs. Chen asked if I'd teach some woodworking classes at the community center for teenagers, kids who maybe don't fit in elsewhere. Rachel's face lit up. "Thomas, that's perfect. You'd be wonderful at that. You think so?" He sounded doubtful. "I know so. You're patient. You understand what it's like to be different, and you can show them that their hands can create beautiful things, even if their brains work differently than other people's." Thomas felt something warm spread through his chest. "Hope, maybe? Or possibility. What about you?" he asked. "What do you want?" Rachel looked at him across the table and her smile was soft and genuine. "I want to keep doing my work, helping kids who need someone to see them. And I want to see where this goes." She gestured between them. "This thing we're building together." "A relationship?" Thomas asked, wanting to be clear. "Yes, a relationship, if that's what you want too." Thomas thought about everything that had happened, about morning coffee and afternoon conversations, about the wooden box he'd made and the way Rachel had hugged him, about her hand in his at Hope House and the way she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. "That's what I want," he said firmly. "Very much." Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. "Good. Because I'm falling in love with you, Thomas Henley, and I wanted you to know." Thomas's breath caught. No one had ever said those words to him. "Not romantically. Not like this. I don't know if I know how to do this right," he admitted. Relationships, love. I've never been good at the things that come naturally to other people. You've been building love for 10 years, Rachel said gently. That cradle? That was love made visible. You know exactly how to love, Thomas. You just do it differently, and that's what makes it special. 6 months later, Thomas stood in his workshop at the community center. Around him, 5 teenagers worked on their own projects under his careful guidance. One was building a bookshelf. Another was carving a chess set. A third was making a jewelry box for her grandmother. They were quiet kids, mostly. The ones who didn't quite fit in at school. The ones who got labeled as different, odd, not quite right. Thomas understood every one of them. Remember, he told them, checking the joints on the bookshelf. There's no rush. Good work takes time, and the time you put in shows the person who receives it that they matter. Rachel appeared in the doorway, watching him teach. She still got that warm feeling in her chest when she saw him like this, confident and patient and so completely himself. After class, Thomas found her waiting. "How was your day?" he asked, the question now as natural as breathing. "Good. Busy. Ready to go home." Home. They'd been spending most nights together, alternating between his house and her apartment. There was talk of her moving in permanently, of making it official. Thomas had started building a hope chest, working on it in the evenings while Rachel read beside him. For them. For whatever future they were building together. The town had changed in how they saw Thomas, or maybe Thomas had changed in how he let himself be seen. People stopped him at the grocery store now to ask about his woodworking classes. The newspaper had run a story about the Cradle, and orders had come in from people wanting custom pieces. But more importantly, Thomas had stopped feeling like he needed to hide who he was. Rachel had shown him that different wasn't wrong, that his way of moving through the world was valid, that he was worthy of love exactly as he was. They walked to Thomas's truck hand in hand. The evening was cool, stars beginning to appear overhead. Thomas thought about Emily, about how she'd always said someone would see him the way she did. She'd been right. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked. "My sister," Thomas said honestly, about how she always believed someone would understand me, would see past the surface to who I really was. Rachel squeezed his hand. "She was wise, she was," Thomas agreed, "and she would have really liked you." They drove home together as the sun set. Two people who'd found each other despite a world that tried to keep them apart. Thomas Henley, the man the town had said wasn't worth loving, had found someone who saw his worth every single day. And Rachel Morrison, who'd been looking for something real after years of something false, had found a love built on understanding and acceptance and the simple, profound act of truly seeing another person. The cradle was delivered. The promise was kept. And the love that had taken 10 years to build was just beginning to grow into something even more beautiful. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are exactly the ones worth finding. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they find you too.